Welcome everybody to the latest edition of the Inside Track. Got a fabulous guest with us this morning, Jez Tapping. How are you?
Good, thanks. And you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Now, it's great to have you on because obviously I've been watching the sort of field of climbing through my son, and we've never really had anyone to talk about the business of climbing and the sport itself and what it's all about. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic because everyone's talking about sort of paddle at the moment. You hear paddle here, there, and absolutely everywhere. But I don't think people actually realise how fast climbing is growing. So we'll get into that in a minute. But probably a good place to start is who is Jez Tapping? What have you? Where's your sort of career taking you to where you are now?
Sweet, yeah. So I've been involved in the indoor climbing industry now for just under 20 years. Started out in a climbing centre called Craggy Island in Carshalton. So setting up a new site as a duty manager straight out of university. So I did my degree in sports development and coaching. So started there, did a couple of years there. And then decided, I think I did my outdoor climbing instructor qualification. So I was a rock climbing instructor for a little time.
Nice.
And then basically decided from there that for a few reasons, management was probably the route that I wanted to go. So I did my master's degree in sport and business management, and basically then started to kind of move more towards, at that particular time, project managing. So I project managed the opening of the XC Centre in Hemel Hempstead, which is a big kind of £5.2 million development at the time, which was indoor skate park, climbing, caving, high ropes, that kind of thing. And then went down, because that was more with a public entity, then went down the route of, I set up a small bouldering wall in Parsons Green, which was then Urban Ascent, is now the Hangar. And then for the last 10 years, I've been operating the Westway Climbing Centre in Latimer Road, so obviously in Notting Hill area. And for 5 years while I was there, I was also the regional climbing manager for Everyone Active. So I was looking after 27 other climbing facilities, from clip and climbs, smaller kind of rope climbing centres, all the way up to the Westway, which was at its peak was a £1.8 million grossing centre. At the same time, I've been on the board of trustees for NICAS, which is a grassroots participation charity within the indoor climbing sector, and generally just been advising for the ABC and the BMC over that period. And then basically for the last 4 years, I've been consulting. The last year in particular, I've been full-time consulting. So that kind of covers the full lifespan of the industry, from new startups all the way through to the commercial growth and commercial growth of established both chains and individual climbing centres, and then working with companies within the indoor sector, so as a subject matter expert, and then a little bit working with federations on kind of risk mitigation, governance, and financial stability. So in a nutshell,
pretty much an expert in what you do. Now, what's interesting is, I don't know in terms of when it really took off. I mean, obviously, we've all known about indoor climbing and so on, but in my book, I mean, obviously, I've seen it the last 5-10 years grow exponentially, and I guess it's trying to get some understanding why you think that is. Why is it taking off as such a explosive sport as it is now?
Yeah, absolutely. So climbing's been around for as an indoor climbing sport. As a sport, indoor climbing's been around for around about 25-30 years in the UK. But yeah, the real explosion has definitely taken place in the last 10 years. Obviously, with its involvement in the Olympics, when it got announced in the Olympics, which was obviously a few years before 2020, which ended up being 2021. So that was where climbing came into the Olympics and started to gain a bit of kind of mass consciousness, get a little bit more traction. In mass population, and that kind of tied into the fact that there was a mass investment in particularly bouldering walls, but in climbing centres in general. Around about COVID, there was a lot of climbing walls which were setting up and then there were some slightly bigger organisations who kind of went really utilised that time, let's say, to establish a lot of climbing centres. So you see in London in particular, as a bit of a kind of microcosm. You see, the scene went from probably around about 5 or 6 climbing walls in, let's say, 2010, and then that's gone up to, I think we have now 28, 29, 30 climbing in London. So that's a great example, and that is, to a lesser extent or to a wider extent, is the same across the UK now as well. And then you see, scenes like America where it's absolutely booming. Maybe it's a bit more kind of cold culturally not acceptable.
They're a bit more into the. I guess it's not an X Games sport, but it is that. It's within that field, isn't it? When you put it with the skateboarding and the BMXing, and it's almost like an alternative sport, which is getting mainstream, which is awesome.
Absolutely, which is again, Tokyo is it was an exhibition sport in Tokyo alongside surfing and skateboarding, BMXing. I'm not quite sure which one. And yeah, it's very much, it is that kind of the X sport being a little bit more individualistic. Is a really nice kind of alternative to traditional sports. So it has got a lot of added benefits when it comes to, especially when it comes to juniors and schools and things like that. But it's been an activity, let's say, for a long time. Outdoor climbing, getting out hiking, then progressing to climbing. But the growth of it as a sport has just seen an absolute boom in the last 10 to 12 years.
And the amazing thing is, it is actually a pretty good spectator sport. I mean, you wouldn't think watching someone climb up a wall would be particularly exciting, but then when you watch these guys do it, and everything from the speed climbing that they do, which is I still can't get my head around, because it simply looks like someone's pulling them up with the rope, the speed at which they go. It's bonkers. But then obviously they're doing the serious climbing, where obviously they take their time and up they go to as far as they can. So there's so much to it that actually you get enthralled once, because it's on Sky now a lot of the time, and it's one of those sports that you sort of go, oh, I'll give it a try, and then you go, oh, this is really interesting.
And that variation you see in spectator sports, speed, lead, boulder. So speed, get up as quick as possible; lead, go as high as possible; and then bouldering's a bit more strength orientated. So it's similar, but it's slightly more challenging when it comes kind of short periods. So that kind of same variation you see in the ability to spectate and take something as a spectator is the same as when you're taking part as a participant as well. So you do tend to find different people gravitate towards different parts of climbing. Speed isn't very popular in the UK, or hasn't traditionally. It's kind of a lot more popular in Eastern Europe, has kind of where it's seen its big growth. But lead climbing and bouldering, you do tend to find boulderers will be, as a demographic, as a user, will be kind of the under 25s, and then rope climbing, beg your pardon, will cover the full spectrum, but will tend to, you'll keep people as customers, let's say, for longer past 25, all the way up to, when I was running Westway Climbing Centre, we had, 18, 90-year-olds coming down.
Did you?
And rope climbing. Yeah, it's massive. It's something which you can stick to for a long time.
I mean, it's also a bit. I mean, we used to take our kids to the Clip and Climb, and I think that's a fascinating little franchise, because you sort of go in. It's absolutely safe. The staffing wise, there's not too much to it, because obviously the ropes are controlled by the technology that you've got. And I just think, what a way to get kids into a sport with pretty much zero risk. I know there obviously is, because you do the governance and everything else, but within reason, it's really well controlled, it's safe, and it's such an exciting thing for the kids to be at a 10-meter height as they're climbing up. And what an intro to the sport. I think it's a fascinating franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if you look at a lot of climbing centres now, they're starting to engage with kind of like the lifespan of the customer. And the two things that I'm always kind of pushing are recruitment and retention, and the kind of attributes and aspects of each. And Clip and Climb is fantastic for recruitment. It's getting people in. It's colourful. It's exciting. It's easy. It's really easy to access that activity. But then it does have a little bit of, you're not changing the rules. You're not changing the walls. You're not changing the kind of the challenges on the walls themselves. So it does maybe lack a little bit on the retention side. Doesn't keep customers very long, although there's a few kind of different products out there, like NICAS Clip, for instance, which I'll talk about in a second. But that tries to retain people in that particular activity. But as I said, high recruitment. And then if you get a feel for it, if you like it, if you like the challenge, you like the fear factor, or overcoming the fear factor, then obviously there's a progression there to potentially rope climbing or bouldering, which have a longer retention span, lifespan of product, so a lifespan of customer engagement in a centre. And then you have the kind of, traditionally have bouldering and rope climbing. Again, rope climbing has a little bit more barriers to entry, because you have to be a bit more, you have to learn the knots, and you have to learn a little bit more about harnesses and things like that, but tends to keep people for longer, both, throughout their life, but also, for a 6-month, 12-month period. Yeah. And then bouldering has high recruitment, and to be fair, high retention as well. So there's a lot more social
Yeah, that's what my son does, and it's incredible to watch, and it's one of those things as well. And I found this fascinating. I think it was you that was telling me when we spoke before, in terms of those routes are changed like every 2 weeks, and you have an expert to come in and create those routes for you, which I thought was fascinating. You know, when you're a layman like me and you look at it from the outside, you don't really think of those sorts of elements of the business. It's not just the same route week in, week out, because obviously that just wouldn't make sense. But you're having experts in to come and create those routes to make them more difficult or easy, or whatever it is, which is quite an interesting thing when you think about it.
Yeah, and it's big business, it's mass business. The route setters are creatives. Both they're very creative when it comes to creating the routes, and it's a very physical activity as well. Obviously, being able to hold up a rope wall in particular, but being able to create something from for a 5-year-old, let's say, and then create something for a top level competitor, and that's what you'll tend to find. You'll tend to find those demographic, those people literally right next to each other. Maybe not 4-year-old, but younger people, and to route set or to problem set. So depending on what's bouldering or ropes, as I said, it's big business, and it's a real big element of your business as to how frequently you set, what grades you set. There's a real kind of art and ever increasingly a science to it as well. But being able to get that right for a business from a climbing centre's point of view is so key. To understand when to set them and what to set will give the centre, will potentially make or break a climbing centre.
Well, I can imagine it's a bit like golf. Golf's a really interesting one, because I'll get there. Because if you set your course up for the low handicapper, obviously if you're a 1 handicapper scratch, you want the greens really fast, you want the bunkers really tough, the grass really, the rough really high. But as a business, if you do that, you increase the rate of play, because obviously the higher handicappers are in the rough all the time, can't find their balls. They ends up being 5-6 hour rounds. So it's having a look at it and go, actually, we can't have our whole centre full of really hard routes, because that's then applying to the 5%. But we also can't have really easy, because so I can imagine it's quite a hard thing to look at and go, actually, we need the hard ones because we want to keep those serious climbers coming in, but also we want to attract the new ones. And so you've got to consider those, so that when they come in, they don't find it too hard and go, I can't do this, I'm not going to do it again. So I can imagine it's quite a challenging role to do to get that right.
Absolutely, and it's it's not a kind of copy and paste. It's not like, we've got to climb wall of a certain size or in a certain area and go, right, we're going to have to do this. It is very much kind of learning from your kind of client base and understanding from them. And as exactly as you said, having that kind of aspirational top level, but not too far, but also having those routes that when you come in, or those problems when you come in as a new climber, going, I really enjoyed that. I came away feeling really good about it, as opposed to I got shut down, I couldn't get up anything. It's super big, and it's kind of interesting. There's a development in the climbing sector now. So traditionally, climbing walls have used grades from like outdoor climbing. So when you're outdoor climbing, depending on how difficult the wall is, the grade, the route is, you'll have different grades. And then that basically got directly translated into the indoor sector, and has been the case for 15, 20 years. But now what you're finding is centres are kind of subjectifying. So they're using different scales to do that. So if you went to one climbing centre and you were climbing a 6B, for instance, and normally or traditionally you'd go to another centre and that would roughly, there's always a bit different, that would roughly be what you climb. Whereas it's now the case that you go to another centre and their grading system is completely different. Just so, again, it's to do that psychology. I heard the term, the McDonaldification. So it is that kind of mass, having that, you come here, you have no expectations, because that's the killer. You have no expectations of what you're going to climb here. Here's just, you just come and enjoy our centre for our centre. So it's interesting to see how different centres are commercialising or commodifying.
Now that's a good phrase to move to something else, because obviously when a lot of these businesses would have started, they would have started as hobby businesses. Someone's really interested in climbing. I'm going to open a climbing wall, and largely a bit like a personal trainer opening his own club. It's I'm doing it because I love it, and I want other people to love it, and they've gone into it. But I can imagine over the last 10 years that's switched massively to a lot more commercialized, because people are realizing they're making money out of it. So what do you think has been the biggest change over that period to bring it more to market?
Probably take back a step. I don't think that is the case. So we're finding we're finding in the UK now, around about 80% of climbing facilities are still passion operator owned. So that's commercial centres. So you obviously have climbing centres climbing walls within schools, clip and climb, stuff like that, maybe separating those out slightly. But commercial climbing centres, around about, obviously it changed a little bit, but around about 80% of centres are still owner operated, and 20% is owned by the bigger groups that are coming in. So I won't mention them, but the bigger groups that are starting to acquire more and more, or build, organically build more centres. So it is very much still, I don't want to say grassroots or kitchen table, but it is very much still with the passion operators. And what they're now finding is they're now needing, especially with obviously what's happening in April with the minimum wage, national insurance, things like that, they're now still starting to have to, commercially switch on or risk, not staying open, or obviously potentially being acquired. So it is very much the case that the majority of the industry is being run, or the centres are being run by people who are not necessarily from a business background, but as you said, are climbers who want a lifestyle business. And I think that's really interesting. One of the organisations I'm involved with, called Climb HQ, is providing fractional services to those SMEs, so smaller businesses, to try and keep up with the bigger organisations. So providing kind of fractional marketing, fractional financial services, fractional HR services is going to be kind of key to those businesses keeping up and being able to stay afloat and stay operating. But ever increasingly, these operators are having to make commercial decisions based on benchmarking. KPIs. You and I, obviously in the leisure industry, are very used to the kind of like lifespan of product, lifespan of attrition rates and things like that, and that is very new to the climbing industry. But a lot of operators are switching on to that and using those to obviously make more informed decisions going forward. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see the professionalisation, let's say, of the industry, which has had a bit of a slow creep, but probably in the last years since COVID, it's obviously 3 or 4 years, has had a real kick in the bum, let's say.
And what would you say is the biggest challenge of running one of these clubs when you go in and sort of start working with them? What's usually the first things you're looking at? Marketing.
So the kind of value proposition of those facilities. If you look at your kind of high quality, high price, most centres, most companies want to be sitting in that premium space, but realistically sit in the value proposition. And I think we've seen a massive growth in the last 10 years of bouldering walls. We haven't seen that same growth of rope climbing walls. And in fact, rope climbing facilities are really struggling, just because in a very, really basic form, rope climbing has a lower margin than bouldering because it just has higher equipment costs. So there needs to be a bit of a kind of a value change there. So rope climbing really needs to start thinking about potentially sitting in the specialist kind of field. So higher cost, not necessarily lower value, but a higher cost associated with as I said, more specialized activity. Whereas bouldering is very much the kind of, the value proposition is pretty simple. Good community, good value for money for, having a good workout, social activity. There's a gym-based activity. Yeah. So it is just changing the kind of value proposition of rope climbing against bouldering, and then leaning into that, and then being aware of what your business needs are if you're a specialist activity and whether you're a value activity. And then the big guns, the bigger chains are the ones that are sitting in that kind of premium space at the moment. And I think they're probably going to start to break away and drive further into that high price, high value proposition.
And what sort of what sort of rates do they charge for? What's the sort of standard going? I think my son pays about £35 a month, which I think is excellent in terms of a price point.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, that's probably coaching. I'd imagine he's being coached and instructed.
No, not. I think he pays £35 a month for the access. I think it's one in Sheffield.
Yeah. Okay, that big one. So so you tend to break it down a little bit when you're looking at climbing income into casual income and coaching income. Right. So there's kind of fairly good equity when it comes to price in bouldering and rope climbing walls, which is a disparity because obviously bouldering has, as I said, the lower higher margins. It's got lower expenses.
Is that because you need less coaches for bouldering? It's a little bit easier, or
No. So that's more to do with the equipment, PPE.
Is it?
And stuff like that, and obviously being able to route set, the costs associated with rope climbing are a facility are particularly high. So you tend to charge, just because that's traditionally been the case. You tend to charge the same amount for a bouldering entry as well as a rope climbing entry. But I said the expenses, the costs for the business are higher when it comes to rope climbing. So that's why I said this has been a boom in bouldering. What was your question? Because I went off on a tangent.
I forgot myself in terms of what we were saying. What's the sort of price points in terms of what most clubs are charging for?
So you're looking at usually a day rate. If you're looking at average across the UK, you'd probably be looking at around about £10 to £11 for a day entry. So that's a whole day's worth of activity, as it were. And then coaching is slightly different. It tends to be junior development or junior development programs. So like NICAS, as I mentioned earlier. So they would be something around, and this probably varies more than anything because of obviously cost of coach, as you said. It would vary somewhere between kind of £40 to £100 for a month. So that'd be like a couple of hours.
That's not bad though, is it? I mean,
Exactly,
if you think a personal trainer is going to cost you 150 to 200, if you want that for a month, so it's a really reasonable. And from a business perspective, if someone's looking at this and going, do you know what? I quite like the idea of investing. Is it a massive? Because one of the big things that puts people off gyms, for instance, is the high upfront cost. By the time give you an example, something like an Anytime Fitness or something like that opening up now, you need to either have or borrow upwards of £1 million now to open a decent gym. So what sort of investment you're looking at in a standard?
Well, one of the real benefits of climbing is it can kind of fit into any space. So you've got these new like climbing centres are opening up now. This kind of I think they're classing it as Japanese style, so really small kind of spaces, a couple of training boards, and you can have that as a value, as a client, as a business, or you can go the whole hog and set up a massive, kind of standalone rope climbing centre. The most recent one being, shouldn't name check, but 270 in Gloucester, for instance, and that'll be multi-million-pound business. Or the other end of the spectrum, as I said, this the kind of Japanese style, you'd be looking at around about 150 to 200,000.
Wow.
Or less. You can really get away with it. I mean, as a general rule of thumb, you have a kind of square meter cost, as in square meter of the climbing wall itself, and that obviously, whether it's higher or not, the footprint. So your footprint can be the same, but you can have a higher. So obviously cubic meters changes, but in general, you can set up a decent sized business for around about 400, 500k, and usually the climbing wall specific element of the cost will be about a third of that amount. Okay. And I think, as a general rule, you look at, to sustain a medium-sized climbing centre, around about 220,000 population, generally quite active, not like a sedentary population. But I mean, we're now finding there's, climbing centres that I'm consulting for, that they're looking at populations of between 50 and 100,000. And it just means you need to scale the proposition to match that. So it really varies. A medium-sized climbing centre that's going to make around about £500,000 generally, with that kind of population density, you'd be looking at around about $1 million, maybe a little bit more than $1 million to set up a facility like that.
It's still pretty good if you're making £500,000 revenue a year. You're getting your return, aren't you? Clearly, so it's a fair while investment. And the great thing is it's a massively growing sport, so that investment is only going to increase. I guess the big thing is when you look at say gyms and stuff. A lot of the boutique ones look at sort of 25,000, 30,000 population. So I guess because it is a little bit unique at the moment, you're just looking for that bigger. So you tend to probably finding it's going into the cities rather than the towns and stuff like that as demographics.
Yeah, I mean, as with any kind of activity, you have that kind of like local feel business type, and you have those destination venues. And destination venues are, there's some really successful ones out there. Westway Climbing Centre that I used to run, Ratho, Sheffield has kind of become awash with what you typically class as a destination venue for climbing. But yeah, like you say, the boutique ones are. They're the ones that you're probably seeing the most growth with at the moment. So they're the ones that are starting to kind of pop up in different locations. And they're the interesting ones. They're the ones that, I mean, the kind of hub and spoke models, lots of bouldering walls, for instance, and then a big destination venue as part of your group. that kind of thing is starting to kind of get there. Those kind of business models are starting to, translate into the real or into climbing, into the climbing sector. So it's interesting. It's just, from a personal point of view, the growth in rope climbing is struggling. It is not that you don't have the same growth that you have in bouldering walls. But then equally, from a little bit of kind of research and study that I did a few years ago, you are looking at a conversion rate. So boulderers will tend to, after about 3 or 4 years, will start to then explore other options. Rope climbing walls then have a bit of a kind of growth. So when you have rope climbing facilities and then you have bouldering walls around them, they'll tend to then get, the kind of, rising tide lifts all boats, whatever it is. So you tend to more climbers in the local area, therefore it supports rope climbing a little bit stronger. So
I guess a lot of the rope climbing guys will eventually go out to do it outside and stuff like that as well, because I assume that's a natural progression. But
same with bouldering a little bit. There's plenty of outdoor bouldering, not necessarily massively in the UK, but I mean, you've got, for instance, Fontainebleau down in France, which is like the Mecca. It's like the
you see loads in Yorkshire, Jez. There's loads of them. You see them dragging their mats around, going out. I can't remember the name of the places they go, but when I lived in Otley, there's loads of sort of small bouldering areas around there, and they're all parked up, dragging their mats out down to the mountains.
It was funny back about 15 years ago when indoor climbing started to really take root and start to really have a growth. All the climbers who are generally outdoor climbers, back in 20 years ago, the majority of climbers were outdoor climbers who then trained indoors a little bit, and that's obviously completely flipped. But there was this big kind of debate. There was this big kind of debate where the effect of the Olympics, whether all those people coming into indoor climbing would suddenly flood the outdoors and would have sustainability issues and access issues. Yeah. It just hasn't really translated. It's kind of it's self-governed itself a little bit, and indoor climbing is just its own sport. And the majority of climbers now, they might touch outdoors a little bit, but will not go climbing outdoors. So all it's realistically seen has just seen a growth in the market share of kind of climbing in as a sector, and it hasn't really necessarily, so lots more money going into access and conservation, but mostly that's channeled from the indoor climbing sector.
Yeah. And do you guys, because it is a growing sport and it's now an Olympic sport, do you guys get a lot of support from Sport England and people like that?
So the charity that I'm involved with, NICAS, which is grassroots participation, we've literally just had a crowdfunder campaign. So NICAS Ascend is one of our products now. It's specifically to do with SEN, so providing climbing progression pathways for SEN neurodivergent users. And basically that was so we got movement funding from Sport England, and then we did a crowdfunding campaign, which is still going actually at the moment, and that's been successful already, so it's hit its target. But yeah, there is there's a lot of I forgot what the question was. I went off on one.
I'm just saying, do you get much from the Sport England or the Olympic?
Yeah, so that was a successful campaign. That's why I mentioned that. But our funding. So the British Mountaineering Council is a national governing body for climbing. So there's a funded partners group. So you have the Association of British Climbing Walls, Mountain Training, NICAS, and I'm probably missing someone, but those partners are all under the umbrella of getting funding from Sport England through the British Mountaineering Council, who are the national governing body. So there is a fair amount of funding. It has certainly increased. Obviously, with the success we saw at the Olympics with Toby Roberts and Shauna Coxey. So yeah, there's definitely been a growth in Sport England UK sport. But as I said, it's channeled through the BMC into different organisations for horses for courses. They do different things to grow the sector.
I think that's the great thing about having a sport as a business, because when you look at, say, gyms and stuff like that, they don't get this, that's because they don't really fit into Sport England. Obviously, UK Active are a trade body; they're not a governing body, so they don't get that sort of funding because it's not a sport. I think eventually you'll find the likes of High Rocks and stuff like that that'll potentially be Olympic sport and be able to do that. But it's great that you guys have that sporting element to it. Yes, it's a business, but you've got those overseeing organisations that can help the business grow as well as the sport. So as the sport grows, the business grows, and I think that's a great environment to be in.
Yeah, Agreed. Absolutely, yeah. And it has that, like you say, it has that kind of aspirational element to it as well. With Olympians now, UK Olympians, you have that that whole kind of storyline, that whole kind of ability to show what the sport can offer from grassroots to the to whatever level you want to take it at. But one of the things with climbing is the fact that it has that kind of sporting element, but it has that history and that foundation in activity. So it is a really good sport, really good for keeping fit and
it's incredible in terms of fitness. My son is as chiseled as you like now. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's only 21 and he eats well, so he was never overweight, but he is absolutely in amazing shape. And that he doesn't go to the gym; it's all climbing. You just look at him, go, wow. But you're carrying your whole body weight all the time, aren't you? Whether that be on your hands, whether it be on your leg, it's an incredible sport for fitness. So if people are looking for something different, I don't want to go to a gym. They find it boring or whatever. Go do something like climbing, because it's the conditioning that you get out of it is unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's maximal. It's maximal, so you can take it as far as you want. And as I said, it's very social. So if you want to go down, if you make a regular habit of every Wednesday, you go down to a climbing wall. If you're just not feeling it this week, you'll probably have some friends you talk to, and you can just chat and have that element to it. Maybe get on the wall a couple of times, and take that all the way through to if you want to every Wednesday night, whatever it is, you can go to absolute maximum. So when you're climbing, you fall off when you can't do any more. So if you want to get that far, if you want to really go for it, as I say, that's a maximal activity. So it's great for cardio, for all the different elements. I can't think of my physiology elements now. And then if you want to gravitate towards being more strength orientated, you're probably going to boulder. If you want to go towards being more stamina orientated, you're probably going to do rope climbing and lead. If you just want the mental challenge, do whatever you want, you can do. But there's so many different elements to it that different people can connect with, and then it's all tied together with that social element. And
I think that's important, actually, talking about that, Jez. It is that social element, and I think that comes one from being a sport and the fact that everybody's so interested in it. But as a business, it's very hard to generate that. I mean, obviously, you've worked in health and fitness and whatever as well, and a lot of clubs struggle with that social element, because a lot of the time, unless you're in the class side of it, and I think that's why a lot of group fitness classes do really well with this. But if you're just going to the gym, it's very hard to build that connection with other people in there. Whereas climbing seems very good at that. Whether you're an expert or a beginner, they all come together as a community, helping each other out. And I don't think that's really something that, like I say, health and fitness aren't brilliant at it. Some clubs are great, but as a rule, we haven't really found the way to do that properly. But I think climbing does that naturally, which is a great thing for a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big things that I'm always pushing with new centres is looking at the community. So how are you engaging the community? Because it is bread and butter. I mean, you can't really have a climbing centre that hasn't got a strong, successful, that hasn't got a community. And some places are really leaning into it. Creating this kind of third space. So your food and beverage offering. The best way to build a community is through its stomach. Around the campfire mentality. Looking at kind of like the food and beverage offering, looking at social sessions, looking at how do we connect different people together, and just catalyzing and leaning into that, because it is one of the unique selling points of this sport. It's very much like, and that's what I was saying earlier, team sports are really good with that, because you're part of the team. That's fundamental.
Absolutely.
Climbing has that element, but at the same time has the individualistic element to it as well, which has created in traditionally a bit of a kind of counterculture, because climbers are a little bit counterculture by history, but I mean that's starting to that's not the case. That's being diluted now. But as I said, the community is often a massive key business element for climbing centres. So it's interesting.
And are these centres, so from a revenue point of view, obviously you've got the memberships and you've got your day passes, are they pretty good on the sort of secondary spend? Is that a strong part of the business?
Yeah, so as a real basic breakdown, so bouldering walls, you tend to have, if you just look at the climbing income, you tend to have around about 30, maybe 40% of the income will come from coaching as opposed to casual. Whereas rope climbing, it's pretty equitable. It's pretty 50% is coaching, 50% is casual. And then it's massive. I mean, where, for instance, leisure centres in particular, so the GLLs, the Everyone Actives, the PFPs, they really struggle with climbing because it doesn't, it kind of stands alone within their budget, and that's probably a bigger issue, because those margins are a lot smaller than what they traditionally find in other sports halls and swimming halls. halls and swimming pools. Whereas obviously what really benefits climbing walls is, like you say, that ancillary spend, that ancillary offering, or the synergistic activity. So the food and beverage offering, the retail offering sometimes can vary, and then the kind of the other activities, so the yoga, the classes, and the different activities which you can tie together. So the kind of climbing income with a well-run climbing facility that has all those different offerings, the climbing income itself will be around about 2/3. I mean, very generalized, but it'll be about 2/3, and then the ancillary offering, will be the other part of that. So they kind of incentivize, do community-based activities, do events, do competitions to try and build that in particular food and beverage kind of offering or turnover. But yeah, it's ever increasingly you're finding the diversification of these climbing centres. So looking at the third, I think I mentioned earlier, third space. So having co-working spaces, for instance. So to say, right, you can come here and you'll be here, or you can be here all day. You can do your work, you can have your food, and you can do your activity in the evening and your social. But as you mentioned, paddle earlier. We've got a couple of clients at the moment who are looking at, they've got these big paddle courts with nothing going on around the outside, and looking at potentially diversifying what they're doing.
I think those two go really well together. I was speaking to a client who was looking to open paddle down in London, and we're still looking for a property. It's quite hard to find a big enough property in London for paddle. That's the challenge. But I said to him, why don't you? I think it was just after we'd spoken, and I was like, why don't we look at climbing on this? Because they're sort of alternative sports as well. So paddle is almost the road to tennis and squash. Yeah. So it's a lot more of a diverse population that are playing paddle, and the same with climbing. It seems a real wide structure of demographics who are climbing. It's not that one type of person. There's loads of different people that are doing it, and you think the two actually match quite nicely. And like you say, the facilities are probably underutilized for paddle, so it makes sense to then cover those walls with something that they can make money out of.
And generally, you have height as well, which obviously is a premium
absolutely
for climbing. So I was out in Bali a couple of months ago with a couple of clients, and paddle is massive out there, really growing, and that's one of the things obviously they're looking to do out there. So maybe slightly less risky than the London option, but it is looking to bring those communities, those activities into a space which is just made for it, really. So it's there's a lot of these synergies. There's a lot of kind of climbing centres out there who sports centres in general, that are looking for these tie-ins, these synergies. You've got a couple out in Saudi. There's one out in Saudi, for instance, where you have this massive wind tunnels, indoor skydiving, and that has a massive climbing centre next to it. So wow. It's just looking at the kind of different psychologies of activities and the people you're going to attract and stuff like that. You do tend to find some centres that do really well in London, actually, that you mentioned the clip and climb, so you've got the soft play, so you've got this kind of lifespans of individuals whereby you can potentially have a soft play and then have a clip and climb and then have a boulder, kind of a kids bouldering space, and then a bouldering wall, and then a rope climb. And you kind of, you have that for, you can literally, someone can come and use you for their whole life, as it were, because there's an activity, it's an activity for each different age. But and therefore it can kind of convert to different spaces. So
I mean, the opportunities are massive. I mean, where do you think the sports or because obviously there's a big difference between the elite sport and the guys competing. Where do you think the industry in terms of climbing is going to go over the next sort of 5 years? Clearly, you think it's going to grow because you've gone into consulting. But I mean, what's the potential challenges that are going to hold it back, and where can you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, there's definitely more area for growth for new climbing facilities. So there is still kind of we haven't necessarily hit that saturation point with population density and things like that. But I think realistically, where the big kind of growth area right now is utilising current facilities better, and commercializing those centres better. So getting higher spend rates, getting higher lower attrition rates, and getting higher lifetime usage, out of the climbing centres we have. So essentially, as I said earlier, commercialising, professionalising the facilities that exist. And I think realistically, we're going to see a separate, we're going to see a disparate change in rope climbing centres to bouldering walls. Rope climbing centres have to sit out on their own. They have to have their own, they have to have a more solid value proposition, as in, better profit margins and things like that. So I think we're going to start to see a little bit of a deviation from bouldering walls to rope climbing walls. And then my real hope, especially in my history, is to see leisure operators in particular really engage with, because they tend to be the ones that have rope climbing walls in their big leisure centres. See them engage in commercialising the sport properly. But yeah, I think we're going to see the grassroots is pretty solid. That kind of participation pyramid is pretty well established, and I think we're just going to see that. And already, even where we are right now, which is not perfectly established but pretty well established, we're already creating Olympians. Very small population, competing against some nations which are really heavily into the climbing side. I think speed climbing, I think is going to struggle to get traction in the UK just because we're not going to have enough climbing. Speed climbing is going to struggle to get traction, but because we can't build the facilities, there's only 2 or 3 speed climbing walls in the UK. So I
can imagine a lot of that's down to a lot of facilities not having the height to put those things in, because I don't know how high they are, but even a decent warehouse, unless you're going into one of these like the Asda warehouse, that have serious height, and you're not going to take one of those for a climbing centre. But the normal sort of industrial sites don't have that elevation on the roof, do they? To put one of those in.
It's 18 metres generally.
Is that what it is?
Have like an Olympic spec speed wall, because they're all exactly the same spec. Hence, it's kind of like standardised. And we've got one in Ratho up in Edinburgh, one in Sheffield. I think there's one down. I'm not totally sure on the third one, but I think there is a third one down. Warwick is the other one, big one. Warwick University has a couple of speed walls as well. So it's it's not. And basically, you create a really tall wall, which is great for rope climbing facility to be able to build around that. But it just doesn't have that kind of, especially commercially, it doesn't have that kind of longevity. So it is hard to commercially justify a speed wall. That being said, it creates the basis for more rope climbing facilities as well. So there's a bit back and forth on the logic of that, but yeah. Do
you see franchising coming into this? Because that's I guess not something that's really potentially taken off yet. You've got your big commercial ones that own 4, 5, 6 or whatever, and the sort of one-man passion businesses. But can you see franchising coming into this?
Wouldn't have thought so. I mean, there has been, I don't want to go into too much detail, but there has been, some of the larger operators have had their fingers in a few different pies. So not necessarily from franchise, obviously from a kind of financial, stakeholder point of view, shareholder point of view, sorry. So I think, I don't see passion operators necessarily getting a huge benefit from franchise. Unless you were getting those economies of scale with your customer management system, with your supply chain and things like that. And I don't.
Doesn't tend to happen in franchising.
No, yeah.
You're really buying into the skill set of marketing and stuff like that is what you'll get from the franchise. You might get small discounts, but as you're saying, they're not really expensive businesses to open in the great scheme of things. So are you going to get that massive saving to start giving 15-20% of your business back?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think franchise is probably going to be a model which hits home. Maybe in a new territory, so not necessarily in the UK, maybe somewhere in another territory that might have a benefit, to kind of get that experience or knowledge in. But that's where I would try and wedge myself into instead of them. But yeah, I wouldn't say that as a model that's going to hit.
And in terms of what's ahead for you, in terms of, obviously you've been consulting with your business 4 years, 1 year full time. I can imagine it's an exciting time when you're seeing all these clubs going up and the opportunities to turn them into commercial businesses with your background. I bet it's super exciting in a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Just to be involved in more startups. I mean, ever increasingly mergers and acquisitions are playing a part in the industry, and that's something which I've got a little bit of history in. So it will be playing a part in shaping what the UK industry in particular, and hopefully territories further afield. I'm working in a few different territories which are 20, 30 years behind the UK, so there's a huge amount of potential for them to be similar markets. So that's an area in general, the industry, and I think I'm really excited at the moment about I'm now the Chief Commercial Officer for Climb HQ, so providing fractional service to those passion operators. So I don't know if I've mentioned it already, but we're looking to bring the scale of bigger climbing centres, bigger climbing groups to individual climbing centres. So, where I said 80% of the industry is still passion operators who don't necessarily have, commercial background or business background. We're basically able to provide fractional services, so marketing, financial, health and safety, HR, and there's a few other services which we're providing as well. So it'll be all under one roof, and basically that'll be a package which will give you the same kind of scale and opportunity which those bigger walls have. So again, the main thing we're leading with at the moment is marketing. Traditionally climbing centres are very individualistic and don't necessarily have kind of a professional approach to marketing themselves. So looking at the kind of annual service plan, the kind of annual marketing plans and stuff like that. I go into so many climbing walls and they're like, don't know. And I ask them, what do you do in January? High footfall, golden quarter, people are flush. People are making New Year's resolutions. That January, for instance, as a little bit of flex, when I was working at the Westway, we had one particular product every January which we pushed and promoted, and in the end, we were making, when I left last January, we were making around about £140,000 from that one product in January. Wow. Had no effect on the rest of the year. The profiling was great, and that every year on year, it was just an increased profit activity, which we were just growing from there, and that was just based around the kind of psychology of how we're going to, everyone says we know that in January we have higher footfall, and it's just capitalizing on that. So it's getting more people in and getting higher spend out of the individuals that are coming through the wall. So there's, and that's just one example. You've got different periods of peaks and flows when it comes to coaching, casual activities, and synergistic activities. So it is just having an annual service plan, having something which you know what your activities are going to be, you know what you're going to push, what you're going to promote, and how you're going to obviously monetize those. So that's the biggest challenge I think the industry faces is moving from hobby to professional.
And to be fair, I mean, I started in the fitness industry 25 years ago, and it was only really the commercial clubs that had the proper systems in place and so on. When you looked at a lot of the independents, again, they were passion businesses. But over the last 20, 25 years, that sort of filtered down into the independents. And that's what's obviously going to happen in climbing with people like yourself. Those levels of expertise are going to come in, and the passion owners are going to become business managers rather than that. We're all into climbing. It's like we're all into the business of climbing now, and they'll only get better, more profitable. And obviously, the more money that's in the industry, then you start getting guys opening second, third, fourth sites, because that's how it works, and that's what you want. So the climbing industry is probably just 15, 20 years behind where health and fitness was. And it's a great time for you to be in that, because you, especially with you being on the council and stuff, you've got a real opportunity to push where the industry goes and professionalize them and get going. So I think it's awesome for you.
As you just alluded to, it is generational. It is, 20 years later, you haven't got the same person who's operating it. Potentially haven't got the person who's operating it who opened it, and so that new generation comes in and they start to go, right, okay, I haven't necessarily got the same personal connection, let's say, to I set this business up, it was my baby, and they come in and they start, like you say, looking at the detail, looking at the the data and stuff like that. So looking at it as a business. So the climbing industry has kind of pushed into that point where it's the next generation is coming in. I don't want to say that. I don't want to push people out and say you're old, but I mean the next generation of business operators are coming in and going, right, how do we make this business run efficiently? And I think it's an exciting time. It's exciting to see people engaging with the sport as a business.
And it's great that you're passionate about it as well. So it's not you're not just a business person going in and advising. You actually got a passion for the sport, and I think that makes you really can't think of the word, but you're genuine, which is great because you've got the passion for it and you're involved in the sport, and so you just want to see the sport grow. But also you've got this huge amount of experience from a business perspective to be able to go in and go, actually, these are your KPIs you need to work to. These are the activities we need to do. These are the processes, systems, and everything you need to make proper money out of your business. And then suddenly you see a business really successful, and you've played a part in that, in growing the sport and people's business. So it's a great place to be.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Still here.
Well, I'm glad I got you on, Jez, because I think, like I say, my son's massively into climbing. He loves it, and so seeing the sport from the outside in the business, it's I thought we've got to get someone like you on, because I'm sick and tired of hearing paddle. Paddle's great, don't get me wrong, but it's nice that for a sport that's growing as fast as you guys are, I don't think it's getting the same coverage, and I think potentially there's huge business opportunities for people out there. They're not just climbing centres and passion. They are potentially huge businesses and money to be made. So I think if someone's looking at something different and they want a different opportunity, climbing could be where they need to go.
Yeah, and increasingly we are seeing people who are operating climbing centres who are not climbers, because it is a solid business proposition. And I think that's where paddle is. Is very much copy and paste. It is very much, you've got 4 courts, you've got 3 courts, and then there's duplicate. It's pretty easy to duplicate, and that's where climbing is maybe a little bit more complicated and have a few more barriers. But at the same time, it is an activity which can work alongside other business opportunities and other kind of ecosystems of centres. So I think it's and it's seeing not similar. I know paddle has a higher growth rate, but I mean it is seeing similar kind of growth in the UK especially. So it is something to even if you're not a climber, to have a look at as a business proposition, because it is pretty solid.
Absolutely, and I think if anybody watches this and thinks, "Oh, I'm interested," we'll put all of Jez's details at the start and the end of the podcast, so you can give him a shout. No harm having a conversation, because I think it's a great sport. But really appreciate your time this morning, Jez. Right. Like I say, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, have a look at the details. But and we'll catch up again soon. But good luck with everything.
Bro, cheers, Ron. Speak to you soon.
Awesome. Let me just end the recording.